Hello and welcome back to episode 22 of the Single Today podcast. This one is called Heavy and Light. Heavy and light. I want to give you another way today to think about your singleness, because I believe if you can realize that singleness is both heavy and light, that you're going to be much more equipped to be single today and to live the full abundant life that God has for you today. By the way, if you are new, this podcast is dedicated to a book that I wrote last year called Single Today. It's all about singleness. And since the book came out, I've had so many conversations with so many people about so many aspects of singleness. So in this podcast, we are just taking a deep dive and having real, raw, honest conversations about all things singleness. And so thank you for coming along for the journey. Before we get into today's episode, another fun announcement to make. The next Single Today conference is happening Friday, April 25th in Waverly, Iowa. So I'm going to be at Crosspoint Church in Waverly, Iowa, April 25th. It's a Friday night from 6 to 8 p.m. We're going to talk all things singleness. We're going to have a blast. And so if you live anywhere close to Waverly, Iowa, much more on that coming soon, but you can sign up for that. And the link to sign up is in the show notes. Would love to see you there, April 25th. We're going to have a good time. Now, episode 22, heavy and light. Here's the thing. Jesus, when you read the Gospels, always seemed to be light on his feet. Like he didn't seem to be worried about a whole lot. In fact, he even tells us, you don't have to worry about tomorrow. But that's not because he was just sort of like skating through life and locking his door and staying away from conflict. Quite the opposite, actually. Jesus had to deal with really heavy stuff all the time. And so he'd like deal with the heaviest topic, and then he'd say things like, look at the birds. And he'd like cast a demon out of somebody and then go, look at the flowers. They're not worried. They're not freaked out right now. Like he'd open blind eyes and then he'd go to a wedding. He'd engage in a really brutal theological debate with a Pharisee, and then he'd go eat some dinner and he'd recline at the table and he'd hang out. Jesus was always doing really heavy stuff, like really heavy work. And then he seemed to walk away from it all really light on his feet. And I've noticed over the last few weeks that that's a really helpful framework for singleness. That singleness is absolutely heavy on one hand, but it can also be really light. And when we understand that it's both, we can learn how to embrace and dive into and not shy away from the heaviness of singleness while staying light on our feet. So just for a few minutes, very simply, I want to talk about how to do that, because what I've noticed over the years is that some single people are really good at like the lightness piece of it. Like they love the freedom that comes with singleness. They take advantage of the advantages of being single. And it's like they're so aware of how amazing singleness is and all the freedom that comes with it that they don't even acknowledge the heaviness. And as soon as somebody tries to acknowledge the heaviness of it, they just like double down by booking another trip and going and having another adventure. And on one hand, that's really great that you can stay light on your feet. But it also, when you start to talk to them more, you start to realize that they're actually avoiding the heaviness of the reality of singleness. And so it's like you try to enter into the real conversations about the struggles that come with singleness, and they immediately just start making jokes about it, right? Or they immediately double down by just talking about like how much they love it. And like you can't even get a word in to them about how it's also a struggle before they like jump in and go, yeah, but also it's also awesome, right? Because everything is awesome all the time. And again, I love that you understand the lightness of singleness, but it's also not a subject that should be handled flippantly. We should be constantly doing like the inner work required to come face to face with the heaviness of singleness, because singleness is a heavy subject. And you can't say yes to something like singleness without saying no to a whole bunch of other stuff. And so when you are single, you are also missing out on a whole bunch of what could be amazing things that would come with having a relationship. That's a heavy thing. And it's almost like we refuse to mourn and grieve the heaviness of singleness by just doubling down and celebrating the lightness of it. But then on the other hand, and this is what I would probably put the majority of people, at least that would listen to this podcast or read a whole book about singleness into. It's like others of us really understand the heaviness of singleness. It's like we're hyper aware of how lonely it can be and how difficult it can be and how much of a struggle it can be. And it's like we've got the heaviness down, but then we lose sight of the lightness that is also supposed to come with it. People who are really good at the heaviness part but are missing the lightness, it's like you're always thinking about singleness, and you're always on the lookout for a potential date, and you're always overthinking everything that happened during that date. I can always tell because they're always complaining about the dating world and how hard it is. And by the way, that's totally true. I will give you that 100%. But also there is room to put it down sometimes and to not worry about it sometimes. And it's like when you get the heaviness piece down, the person is always looking for ways to bring up just how hard the dating world is, overthinking every interaction, always thinking time, like we talked about in the last episode, always feeling like we're running out of time. And so to the one who feels like they're very good at the heaviness, well done. You've got one side of the coin, but I want to introduce you or help you see that there's also a lightness that can come with singleness. And to those of you who are very good at the lightness side of the coin, I want to help you step into the deeper waters of singleness, because when you can learn to have both the heaviness and the lightness, then you can learn to thrive while being single today. This is what Jesus was so good at. Like, he was a master at holding the tension between the heaviness and the lightness of every aspect of life. That's why he said things like Matthew 11:28-30, famous passage. Even if you're new to the Bible, or even if you're unsure what you think about Scripture, by the way, welcome. We're really glad that you're here. Jesus says this: "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened." All of you who are feeling the heaviness of life and you're weary and you're burdened by it all. He goes, "Come to me and I will give you rest." And then he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." We can talk about that language in another episode. He says, "For I am gentle and humble in heart." He says, "I'm gentle and I'm humble in heart." That's the only time in the Gospels that Jesus describes himself, by the way. There's a great book called Gentle and Lowly by, I'm spacing on the guy's name. I will put a link to it in the show notes. It's a phenomenal book. Jesus describing himself as gentle and lowly. He says, "And you will find rest for your souls." He says, "For my yoke is easy," and then get this, "and my burden is light," which is a phenomenal phrase. My burden is light. Jesus goes, "I'm aware that there is a lot of heaviness to this world, but if you come to me, I will trade in the heaviness. I will carry the heaviness for you, and I will trade you and give you an easy yoke and a light burden." You can actually learn how to be light on your feet. Get this, not by avoiding all the heaviness, not by avoiding all the difficult conversations, not by locking your door and closing your blinds and staying to yourself and never having any conflict ever, but rather by coming to Jesus and by bringing it all to Jesus. And so how do we do that? How do we embrace the tension of both the heaviness and the lightness of Jesus, or of being single? The answer is Jesus. The answer is you go to Jesus. Now, that statement just made eyes roll all around the world. I can see you rolling your eyes at me as you just heard this? Of course, the answer is just take it to Jesus. It's like the most Christian thing to say ever, right? And I will say that I thought long and hard about coming up with a better statement to say. And then I just realized it's just true. The answer is Jesus. And so I don't have a better statement because that's the most accurate statement. You take it to Jesus. Now, here's why eyes are rolling, and let's chat about it for a second. What I don't mean by that is I don't mean for that to be like cold comfort. I don't mean for that to just be this easy answer where it's like, yeah, take it to Jesus. And if you just pray about it, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. Like we all know that that doesn't work, right? In fact, the model that Jesus gave for us when you read the Gospels is he would invite people to come and follow him and be with him for like several years and go through life together and experience the highest highs and the lowest lows. Like when you really study Jesus's teachings, he was inviting his disciples to like grieve the really hard stuff, to sit down and enter into the heaviness that came with life, to not be afraid of it, but rather to experience all of it. Jesus wasn't afraid of the heaviness of life. And so when I say take it to Jesus, I'm not saying take it to Jesus and then stop complaining about it already. That's actually the opposite. What I'm saying is take it to Jesus and realize that Jesus is in it with you, that he wants to sit in the heaviness with you, that he wants to grieve with you, that he wants to mourn with you. Like, how about this? That rejection that you experience, that breaks Jesus's heart too. Like Jesus cares deeply about you. He cares deeply about the things that you care about, which means he is feeling the heaviness right alongside you. Jesus feels the loneliness right alongside you. Jesus feels the worry and the anxiety that you're feeling right alongside you. Jesus knows. He feels it. He understands. And so know that when I say bring the heaviness to Jesus, I'm not saying bring it to Jesus and then forget about it. I'm saying bring it to Jesus so that together he can be your good shepherd as you enter into the deep water together. Jesus wants to go to that place with you. And that can be, by the way, as simple as just closing your eyes and saying, okay, Jesus, this thing that I'm going through right now is really difficult. Like, let's just use a timeline. I was hoping to be in a relationship by this point, maybe hypothetically, whatever it is for you. Okay, if that's your story, then close your eyes real quick and say, hey, Jesus, I was hoping to be in a relationship by this point, and I'm not. And that's really hard. And then just see how many emotions you can name. That's really scary. That's really sad. That makes me irritated. That makes me jealous of my friends who are in a relationship. That makes me scared about what the future may hold. And just start naming it all, bringing it to Jesus. And as you do, almost just picture yourself moving all of those emotions from your shoulders over to his, and understanding and realizing that that doesn't make them go away, but rather it means that you have somebody who is spotting you. You have somebody who is in this with you. And that person, by the way, is very good at holding all of this stuff. And again, I'm going to keep saying it on repeat. He's not saying, and then I'm going to snap my fingers and it's all going to go away and you're going to live happily ever after. Instead, he's going to feel it with you. He's going to enter into the pain with you. This is what Jesus modeled all throughout his ministry, especially in breathing his last on the cross and exhaling and saying, it is finished, as he entered into the sin and the suffering alongside of us. Like 2 Corinthians 5 says, he took him who knew no sin to become sin. Jesus took that all. He took all of the heaviness so that we may become the righteousness of Christ. You see it? Jesus took all the heaviness so that we can go free and that we can walk lightly. We can be light on our feet. And I love that, because that is not saying that we then go and avoid all of the difficult conversations of singleness. That doesn't mean that we bury our head in the sand and pretend like it's fine and everything's okay. Quite the opposite. It means we move into the heaviness with confidence, knowing that our good shepherd is walking right along with us. And so I thought it would be fun to end this podcast with a passage, not a passage, I always say that, a page from my book, Single Today, that's going to make you laugh, hopefully. It's actually a kind of a heavy thing that I've learned to laugh at. I've learned to understand and enter into both the heaviness of what I'm about to read and the lightness. And it's all about a reoccurring nightmare that I've had since I was young. And I want you to feel, as you listen to this, feel both the heaviness and the lightness, because I think it may free you up and give you a helpful framework for you in whatever situation that you are in. It's page 140 of Single Today. Recurring nightmares. Have you ever had a recurring nightmare? The type where you wake up in the middle of the night in a pool of sweat, where you have to take a few deep breaths and get your bearings. And then you start to be thankful that it was just a dream. What's the common theme in your nightmare? Drowning, being chased by clowns, falling, death? I have two recurring nightmares. The first one is relatable to normal people. It's my turn to preach, but I have nothing prepared. So I slowly walk up on stage and try to get the audience to cheer over and over while I try to think up my next move, but nothing comes. That happens all the time to me, by the way, in dreams. Pretty normal. You've probably had your own version of it. The second one may be harder to resonate with. I'm dressed in a suit, standing in front of all my friends and family, taking vows to commit the rest of my life to a person I've never met. It's my wedding. Then I wake up in a panic and feel so much relief when I realize it was just a dream. I remember experiencing it from a young age, like 8 or 9. How ridiculous is that? Many people dream about their wedding day, but very few have nightmares about it. Which is funny for a couple of reasons. It took me a while to see the humor in it. I used to wake up sweating, but now I wake up laughing, because it occurred to me that unless things go terribly wrong, no one is ever going to force me to get married. Marriage is something that you get to decide to step into when you're ready. In other words, if I'm standing up at the altar, it's because I've decided to be there. The thing missing in the nightmare is the whole falling in love with a person and deciding I want to spend the rest of my life with them thing. That nightmare used to render sleep impossible for the rest of the night. These days, when I wake up from that dream, I whisper my prayer, less grasping, more laughing, like we talked about a few episodes ago. Then I quickly fall right back to sleep. It's a really funny story. It's also really heavy if you think about it. That line of lots of people have dreams about their wedding day, but few people have nightmares about it. That reality has caused me to do a lot of the inner work. Like, I have taken that reality to my spiritual director, therapist, multiple times. I've had multiple conversations with people I trust. Hey, why am I having this dream, and why does it throw me off so much, and what is really going on there? And like, let's not be afraid of the heaviness of that reality. Let's go into it. But because I've done a lot of that work, I'm now at a point where I can laugh about it, where I can hold it very lightly, and I can see the humor in it. Even as I was just reading it then, it hit me in a whole new way how lightly I'm able to hold at least that element of singleness. And so that's what I want to challenge you with today, very simply. For those of you who are like, I got the lightness thing down, I probably need to take singleness a little more seriously. Great. That's your invitation this week. But for those of you who are really good at the heaviness side of it, I want to give you an invitation to embrace the lightness. And again, doesn't mean you let go of the heaviness. It means you learn to hold the tension between the two. How do you do that? By going to Jesus, who said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So today, may you experience just how light that burden really is as you learn to embrace the tension between heaviness and the lightness of being single.